How about a little countdown? And then we get going, kind of lets people get their seats, buckle up, or just, shout out to somebody to Good to see everybody with you. Yeah, I got to make sure I'm not muted. For some reason, this thing has been auto muting, and that's not a bad thing because then it hears everything, whether you want it to hear it or not. And in this day and age, somebody's always listening. So it might as well be to me. All right. So Friday, yay, it's already here. And working the late shift on a Friday was never too bad. It was always the 5, 6, and 10 o'clock news. So I didn't usually get out of work until, 10, 10:45, 11 o'clock if it was really late. But that was always better than the sports guys who were there until, well, later because they always had a little sports add-on at the end on Friday nights. Not too bad of weather going on around the country today. Things are a little weird, but then they've been weird for a long time. Record heat in the far northeast, where Caribou, Maine, if you know your geography or are from New England or a weather geek, like, if you're watching, then there's got to be a little geek in there. Caribou, Maine is not typically one of the warmer spots, and it's ridiculously green. So to get to near all-time record highs takes a little bit of effort. It takes a lot of heat from the sun, and the atmosphere has got to be compressing because a compressing atmosphere is always going to be warmer than something that's expanding. It's like a piston in a vehicle. The compression is where the heat is generated, and that's kind of what's been going on in Maine. So let's pop over and take a look at that. And there's the alert that came out of the National Weather Service out of Caribou, Maine, with a public information statement, and this is preliminary. They did get to 96 degrees, and this ties the all-time high temperature in Caribou. The all-time record of 96 was first established on June 29, 1944, and that tied once again on May 22, so early in the year, back in 77. And they do this little disclaimer. It is very important to point out that the weather records in Caribou began on January 16, 1939, and thus do not include all of the 20th century. There are other locations that have deeper records that go back farther into the 20th century, and those include record highs in some of the near surrounding towns back in the earlier 1900s, 1919, 1907, 1935, where they did exceed the triple-digit mark and got a little warm. Now, contrast that. And if you were paying attention yesterday, we talked about that if you've got this yin and yang, if you've got a yang and that's the record heat, then there's got to be this yin elsewhere, somewhere either downstream, say in the Atlantic, in a trough of low pressure that's brought in some cold, or farther west or upstream, as we like to call it in meteorology. And that would be the snows of January depths on the Idaho-Montana border, where there was a few locations, at least one or two of those snow tell sites. They're these automated sites, so you can't establish record snowfalls off an automated station. You've got to have somebody go out with a ruler or some other mechanism. Rulers are very good and high on the list of accuracy to measure how much snow came down. And some of those snow-tell sites were recording between 15 and 20 inches worth of snow, which would have really, for any time of year in those remote locations, was exceptional. All right, good to see you in there, Vicky, Risa. Yeah, I was looking, I'm specifically looking at that Texas Panhandle for you, and it didn't look all impressive today, but we'll get their radar and we'll have a look at that. And Sasha, hi, good to see you there. And Michael G, dropping in from Thailand. Good for you. Good for you. It's just the beginnings of the day. I guess it's probably late morning over there. All right, so we've had the snow in Idaho, Wyoming, or Idaho, Montana. Well, Wyoming as well. We just didn't highlight Wyoming's totals. We did see snow out of Evanston yesterday, so that would satisfy Wyoming. And there's the cool weather in the Rockies. But here's where it's hot. Here's where the heat is in far northern Maine at 93 degrees. I think this was like valid 16 UTC. So where I am in the mountains, that's 10 a.m. 10 a.m., 10, 11, 12. So noontime, already 93 degrees in Caribou, Maine. So that was kind of exceptional. Don't know that I see another 93 degree on the map, and maybe that's the whole reason why the thing was posted, that at that farther northern latitude that we ended up with that kind of record heat. Well, the focus for showers and thunderstorm activity will be mainly across the central U.S., so says the Weather Prediction Center, over the coming days. Isolated to scattered flash flooding possible, especially across the southern plains today. I've seen some pretty impressive rainfall totals out of those storms that started last night on the Colorado Front Range, and they've kind of worked their way across Kansas. They got hammered back once they got to Salina, Topeka, Kansas, and now they're trying to regenerate once again. And then there's the heat in the east. There's that Caribou where we actually did get to 96 degrees. 96 is I don't want to say it's brutal, because I've been in worse, much worse, living in Oklahoma, where it was day after day after day. But back in Maine, you get that kind of heat and it may last max 24, 72 hours, 2-3 days. That's it. And then it's pushed out of the way. So there's the Caribou story. We're glad that happened. And then underneath it, we're still that deep low spinning across the Carolinas, now beginning to lift out. Numerous videos have hit Twitter of the flooding in the Virginias and even some of the higher trains of North Carolina, as this storm has been putting down quite a bit of water. And then you've got to have one epic thunderstorm lightning shot, and that coming in last night as I don't know, you kind of get the urge to go growing. I always wanted to see big storms on the plains. Shane says, a 51-year-old born and raised in upstate New York. So I went out and got my bucket list shot in Kansas. So he must have just done a little road trip, bringing his Nikon Canon, his photography out there, and he got a shot. All right, NASA GISS started to cool the past and warm the more recent temperatures right around 1980. The net differential from 5 adjustments resulting in a warming of 1/3 of a degree Celsius. And so we're seeing how these guys, just tweak different data sets, because they've got to be able to have headlines that say this was the warmest year ever. The warmest year ever. And that makes news. If they said, no, this was in 7th place, and we're not that warm, but there are places that were cooler than they have been in 2 decades, and others that are kind of warm, it wouldn't get the headlines. So we're all about headlines. And that's kind of the exciting part of meteorology and climatology, is seeing how this whole field has evolved in the last, as long as I've been in it, back to about 1980, when this agenda began to take form, that we need ultimately, the only goal is so that there's some kind of governments that covers all the countries that were in Rio or Kyoto or the Paris Accord. Those signatories that signed their countries' names to that then are inching themselves one step closer to a government that is greater than their own sovereign government, a government to come in and dictate air quality, dictate how you consume energy. There can be a blessing, but there also can be a downside to that, is once you allow that authority in, it becomes very, very difficult to get rid of it. And that's the trouble with where this whole climate agenda is going. And I'm sorry, I was suckered in early on. I really, really was. I was the good boy going out and talking to kids about climate change and global warming, and I did my part. And then I had my eyes opened, and it rocked my world. All right, still fires. They're still raging deep in the south. Smoke plume, smoke plume, smoke plume. I mean, let's just go full on full screen. You don't need to see my mug over there. And that's the fire. So if you're in the Southwest, from Texas, Oklahoma, there's fire smoke. It's coming your way. And then if you're in the Gulf Coast, you've got Saharan dust still coming your way. So that's kind of the satellite imagery across the West. And then the big news for me, that because I like rain, I like thunderstorms, is a lot of storms of the Colorado Front Range. They started last night, merged into Kansas. We're trying to head east. They hit a brick wall, and then they just kind of leaked southward over the course of the day. You can see that outflow boundary right there, running out ahead of it. And then big storms rolling through West Texas. Let's start with the national radar, throw that into motion real quick, and just kind of scroll that into the middle. Some good rains back east. That big low has kind of been there long enough that it hasn't necessarily rained itself out, but it's losing its definition. And so the sharp edges of the circulation is now coming apart. And then we're going to have to refocus in North Texas and in Oklahoma, where even into the far northern panhandle of Texas, where it's been dry, and even drier yet in eastern Colorado, those rains are coming. And the rainfall totals have been impressive. 1, 2, 2.5 inches, Wichita, same totals for Oklahoma City, Topeka with about 3/4 of an inch. And now it's rolling into North Dallas, Fort Worth, Denton. And then we'll see how this evolves, how well it can hang together, because it's this part of the country out in the high plains that really need the rainfall. This is the drought monitor. This is updated every Thursday. So we had a look at it yesterday. So anywhere where we can see any of the shading, any shading, S stands for short-term dryness, L for long-term dryness. And then the light yellow is just where we're beginning to see the topsoils kind of drying out, where there's a beginning of a little vegetation stress, to where we get into deeper, longer-term deficits of moisture, where the streams are just barely trickling, and the demand is so high for water because of the time of year it is. That's when we get into the reds, where our rainfall deficits have been monumental. And so Weather Underground, Wonder Map, WUunderground.com, and they really kind of do a good job of bringing. This page freezes up so quickly. I have to completely pop over to coronavirus. That'll kind of reset it. I come back to weather stations, and it says, "What would you like, Scott?" And so now I can scroll in and look around. And so a lot of people will set up weather stations, and they'll hook them up to the internet and then report every 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to Weather Underground. So it's really kind of a cooperative network, and yeah, I love it. I participated when I was in Puerto Rico. Boy, it's not like it's been that long, but you just hook up your station and you go for it. And I really kind of enjoyed sharing my observations. But Oklahoma City, where you're kind of on the edge of the drought, it's good to see the 2.5, 1 2/3, 2 2/3, 2.5, that kind of precip, 3+ inches as you get down towards Apache. So this is kind of cool. And for a weather geek, there's nothing better. And they've got an app on the phone, and hell, that always rocks. All right, back to the Weather Prediction Center for the official maps that they send on out. And either you agree with them or you go renegade. And I kind of like to go renegade usually, because that's where the accuracy is renegadeness. If you look at it in finance, do you want to follow your broker? I mean, honestly, if you can't figure out what your broker is going to tell you, then you really shouldn't be investing. I'm just saying. All right, come tomorrow. Actually, this is today, and this is where we're seeing that severe weather from southeastern Oklahoma into Texas, with the green, just with the risk of showers and occasional thunderstorms, but nothing exceptional for your Saturday. So that's a good day to just get your yard work done, focus and get things accomplished until you go geek out on weather again in the middle part of the nation. All right, what I want to look at is probably precip. Let's go to excess. We could just go to QPF. And this is the whole 1 to 5 day total. So we were seeing the drought out here and into Northern California, into Oregon, and into Washington. So over the next 1 to 5 days, very little precip, even out through 7 days, through the coming week, once you get past the spine of the Rockies and westward, there's just not a lot that looks like it's going to happen. I'll run now to one model. I think it's the second tab over here, and then 18 days. This is kind of what it's saying as well, the GFS, the Global Forecast System, keeping the heaviest precipitation into the Western Lakes where it's not terribly dry. So they don't necessarily need the water. They love to have it, but they don't need it. One thing, guys, that has my attention is this bullseye up near Edmonton on the front range of those Canadian Rockies, east of Banff, Nelson, and so forth. And if we hold that cursor over there, it's running a bullseye of 8.5 inches worth of rainfall. And we saw the flooding that came out of there last weekend. We looked at that $1 billion worth of damage. And these models have been hitting that area with another like rainfall event. So this is something up there you kind of want to look at. If you can see where you needed to clear your yard or get the rain, the gutters cleared out to get the water flowing, by all means, prepare in that direction for another kind of epic rainfall event. As we're seeing the high pressures, here I am going on a rant, kind of retreating to the northern latitudes. I'm going to go out here. This is probably Sunday, Monday, so that's not very far out. But we've got this high that sits over Canada, central part of Canada, and that's the headline: is that we'll see and continue to see these kind of highs separating from where they should be in the subtropics, down across the southern U.S., down and through here. And these waviness, the convolution in the jet stream should not be happening this deep into the summer season. We should be a much more relaxed, much weaker jet stream, but we see these big highs. Here's another massive 576. This will bring 70s and 80s easily up to the Arctic Ocean. This coming up literally the beginning of July. And then the deep low drops into off the BC coast and continues to flush in cool, refreshing air. It's always nice to get a cool breeze in the summer, but then that heat is displaced to the north, and what would typically be there has got to go somewhere. This is largely a zero-sum game. And then the jet stream remains wavy across the northern tier of the U.S. Don't really see anything exciting in the tropics, especially the Atlantic. There's not a whole lot going over there. Yeah, Robert, thanks. We do what we do. There's a truth that's spoken, and when you only have a few minutes to speak, like on the news, I was lucky to have 3.5 minutes. If I took 3:45, I sometimes heard about it afterwards because I'm taking it from somebody else. So this gives me a little bit of a larger platform to talk about these kind of cool things. All right, we're going to move this to Monday at 5. Or 5 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. So it'll be 2 hours earlier. This kind of gets deeper into the evening and inhibits me being able to do other things. And it'd be nice to get it out a little earlier in the afternoon. We'll see how the audience responds. And then largely, you're going to have to also look for me because I'll be going into a group, into the Success Secrets for Business, Family, and Life group. So you'll have to find the broadcast inside there. I will share it out to my page, but that'll likely preclude being able to interact in real time. So we'll see how that eventually works out. All right, everybody, have a great Friday. If you're fortunate, it was payday, and that means you still have a job, and that's a good thing too. All right, everybody, keep looking up, and I'll see you Monday.